All right, hello and welcome to yet another Value Podcast. Today I'm excited to have my first return guests, Matt Turk and Daniel Schneidenberger. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
It's been an adventurous 24 hours.
Great. Well, hey, I'm going to start this pod the way I do every pod, and that's by pitching the two of you again. But, given we're going to talk about the CVR again today, I'm just going to start this up front with a disclaimer. Nothing on this pod is investing advice. No one should rely on anything in this pod. And CVRs are extremely risky. There's a real chance of zero here. So that out the way, let me start by pitching the two of you. People can go back to the first pod for the original pitch, but I'm going to update it a little bit since September 15th. Matt, I'll start with you. I think of you as the Kim Kardashian to my Paris Hilton. You come on my podcast one time, we do a threesome together, we post an interview, and you're just going off to wild success in the YouTube world. You've got your own channel now. So I'm just so proud to be the Paris Hilton to your Kim Kardashian.
You're still royalties, aren't you, Andrew?
Maybe at some point I'll put a tax on you, Empire. And then Dan, more seriously, the work you've done on the CVR the whole time has been fantastic. Both of you on the last pod, I got so many comments on how deep and how good the work you were. But what we're going to talk about today, the work you did on this check, it's one of the best checks in Edge I've ever gotten. So it's creative. It really speaks to how much work you're putting into this. So, I think it's awesome. So that pitch out the way, I'll turn it over to you guys, and especially Dan. We talked about the CVR September 15th. It was around $2 per share. Today it's around $3.30. What's happened since the last time we talked?
Sure. So I think the big question of the CVR has always been, at least in the last 2 months, has been whether or not the FDA will be able to inspect those facilities for approval. It was very clear from all the communication from Bristol Myers that this was the main risk, that the review was going well otherwise. And the other reason why this is so important is that we've seen from the BMYRT, PDUFA and CRL that if the FDA doesn't plan to approve a drug, they don't inspect in this environment, amid this pandemic. So knowing whether or not those facilities get inspected became very, very important to the whole CVR story, right? And it's not just about the one-day move, but for me, it was always clear that this would be a security that would be very, very hard to own going into October, going into November, if you don't have clarity on the inspections, right? That's why I thought it would be so important to know. And again, it's not about the pop. It's not about the move from, to 60 to 70 to $3.30. What's really important for us, how can you own the security in size going into the Ida-cel PDUFA if you don't know, whether those plans got inspected or not. And, we started thinking about this, how can you approach this problem, right? And, we had this hypothesis that an FDA inspection would be potentially, we potentially would be able to identify FDA inspectors on the parking lot just based on patterns, if we observe, because employees would usually arrive in their car alone. We also observed that junior employees would, dress very, very casually. They would usually wear T-shirts coming to work, and potentially also arrive at different times. So this was our hypothesis. Now, how are we going to do it? We looked at different options. At some point, we became creative. We even thought about there's a fire department right next door. So we were thinking, can we ask those guys to attach a camera to their building to monitor it remotely? We were even thinking about some kind of contest, for the firemen. You get $10,000 or $20,000 reward if you bring us proof. But then I sort of thought about the risk in that. We didn't want to create any kind of difficult situations either for Juno or for those firemen. So we found another plan, and we had somebody watch the facility actually, or the parking lot from a public road for the last 2 months, and with the hope that we will be able to identify the FDA once they show up. And you know, it was a very interesting process. We didn't know what the outcome would be here, but to us it was always very important to. I think every time you do a research project like that, more broadly, the most important thing is to do it in a way, you know, that's ethically and legally crystal clear. Where there, you know, you don't want to get into any kind of gray zone. That's why we also made it very clear that we would never, you know, talk to junior employees, for instance, because we just didn't want to get in any kind of trouble. Okay, so we are watching this parking lot from a public road, and you know, this is something that anybody can do. And as a matter of fact, I think we were first on site, but you know, in the last few weeks there were at least 3 crews, or you know, 2 other PIs watching that parking lot. So it was we were not the only ones having that idea. Let's phrase it that way. So what have we observed? We were tracking, you know, patterns for quite some time. So we had a database of you know, license plates, for instance, so that, you know, when a new car would show up, we would be able to quickly check whether this is a car that's new or existing. And you know, that was very helpful in finding this. And what happened yesterday is that you know, we had a car show up that has never before been on that parking lot, and we had 2 people in that car, dressed you know, business casual. They parked their car on the lot. They went to the trunk, you know, opened that trunk and got 2 suitcases out of it, which you know, we've never observed before from any kind of, you know, junior employees. So at that point we were on high alert. And then you know, we had a private investigator run the license plate, and came back with a name. And you know, it is one of those names where when you type it into Google, the first thing that pops up is the LinkedIn page of a FDA inspector. So, you know, at this point, to me, it was proven beyond reasonable doubt that that the FDA was there. And I also, you know, got I also heard from indirectly from one of the other teams that were on site. I think they didn't spot the FDA, but they spot senior Bristol Myers QC people on site. So, you know, everything lines up at that point. So we were very certain that the FDA inspection was actually taking place. And I should maybe add to that, you know, everything also lines up, because actually one of the first signs that we were watching for is they had those two visitor parking spots right in front of the facility, and they had covers on them that said open parking, okay? And they were there for, I mean, all the time, for 6 weeks. We never saw them remove those covers. So the first sign that we observed early last week is that at some point, those covers got removed, okay? And we always thought that this would be one of the earliest signs that the FDA, you know, that an FDA inspection might be imminent, okay? And I think this is one of those things that's probably very sensitive, but it's not very specific, right? I mean, they could remove it for a number of other reasons, but that sort of put us on high alert. And then the next thing that happened is that CFTN article came out that said, you know, there's no inspection scheduled yet, but you know, here's the plan how they're going to do it. It's going to be a local inspector that goes there, and somebody from CBER will be on the phone. And you know, to me, everything makes sense. Maybe at that point in time when the CFTN article came out, which, by the way, I know they don't have a great reputation, but you know, I think the article itself, the content was very credible. It all lined up. You know, at that point, maybe the inspection wasn't scheduled yet, but we were in high alert, watching out for this. And you know, I think yesterday, you know, what we were waiting for happened. It was a local inspection team. I should also say that we were able to find the owner of the car in the FDA employee database. He works for the Bothell field office and is a very senior inspector there. So
my favorite part of the story is if we didn't have the CTFN article, we would have almost assumed with real certainty, I think, that it was going to be a rental car and somebody coming from Maryland. So I mean, yes, I'm sure Dan would have ran the plate, but I wouldn't have thought there was a very high probability we would have gotten anything back on the plate, because I wouldn't have thought it would have been a local person's car.
You guys are truly doing spycraft out here.
Dan gets all the credit for this. I told him, I said this yesterday on my YouTube video, but I thought this idea was crazy. When he first started doing this 2 months ago, there wasn't any reason to think Bristol-Myers wasn't going to inspect. So I just thought he was wasting his time. And for him, he thought if he can see an inspection, he can get ahead of it and make the position bigger. It changed over time. It went from that, I can make this bigger once we see an inspection, to we have to see this, because if we don't see this happen within 30 days before, 40 days before, he was going to sell his whole position. He was nervous. And I was, as recently as a few days ago, Dan and I were talking about this. He was wondering, if we get to the end of next week and we don't see an inspection, what do we do? And I told him, he'll tell you this. I mean, I told him I was not selling under any scenario, because I'm so confident that this is going to be approved by the PDUFA date that I'm not going to find out one day that they decide to do a virtual inspection. And just because your guy didn't catch a car, that we got freaked out. He hadn't decided. I don't think he would have sold either, but he hadn't decided yet what he was going to do by the end of next week. Right, Dan? I mean,
yeah, I think that's more or less correct. And I think, you're pointing out an important point. You have to be, you have to have enough evidence and enough confidence to hold a position that is as binary as this one. And if that inspection hadn't happened, let's say 30 or 25 days prior to PDUFA, I think I would have probably sized my position down a little bit just to be able to sleep.
So, hey, I think you said something that this just applies to all investing. I think investing is a lot of game of building confidence and conviction in a position. I think the reason a lot of people kind of underperform is some bad news comes out. If you don't have confidence or conviction in the position, you say, oh, this blows my thesis up, and you just panic sell at a loss. But let me just summarize what I think I heard. So basically, for the CVR to pay off, Ida-cel, which is the drug we're talking about here, needs to be approved by the end of the year. It has a PDUFA date in November, and the gating factor to approval seems to be they need a successful inspection of 2 facilities, right? And what you did is you hired a private investigator to sit in the parking lot, basically, of one of these facilities, or sit outside the parking lot, but kind of monitor the parking lot. And that investigator saw what you believe is an FDA inspector on site, and you're kind of listening. You saw the person, you ran their license plate and everything, so you think this was an FDA inspector. And it lines up with the timeline for an inspection, lines up with this getting approved on time. Am I kind of summarizing that correctly?
Correct, yeah. And I mean, we ran the license plate. We know that the car that parked in the Juneau parking lot is registered in the name of an FDA inspector that works for the Bothell field office. We saw him and a colleague of him, or somebody who we believe is a colleague of him, walk into the front entrance of the facility. We also know that senior QC personnel from Bristol was on site. So, I mean, I think, if this was a jury trial for murder, I would vote guilty.
They might be hand delivering a complete response letter, just a courtesy.
So let's assume, and I think one of the big debates, and I tweeted this, I sent this to you guys. I think one of the big debates is the stock went from 270 to 330 on you tweeting out that you saw an inspector. And I have heard a lot of pushback from a lot of people. Your Twitter account is anonymous, though at this point, this will be the second podcast you've done with your name and face out there. People can see who it is. But a lot of people are saying an anonymous Twitter account tweeting at what the time was a grainy photo, and I think you deleted that for privacy reasons, but you said there's an FDA inspector on set. An anonymous Twitter account posting this, I mean, that is someone, a lot of people are saying that's more in line with someone trying to pump than real serious information. I do think a lot of people are kind of questioning, hey, is this a trustworthy source? I mean, I think you're trustworthy. Matt thinks you're trustworthy, but I do think that's a question. But let's put that aside. People can make that decision on their own based on what you said. If an inspector was on site, what are the odds of Ida-cel getting approved by the end of the year?
Okay, so I think we already heard from Bristol Myers that the rest of the review was going well. And I think the biggest challenge for Ida-cel was the CMC part, CMC review, because it is a more difficult or more complex process compared to those other CAR-Ts where they separate the CD4 and CD8 cells, and that just adds a whole another layer of complexity. Okay, but we've been able to see from the FDA that they don't perform those inspections if they haven't arrived at the conclusion that they plan to approve a drug. So for me, this has for me, this de-risks the CVR in two ways. It's not just that the inspection couldn't happen in time for logistical reasons. In fact, we know it did now, or it is still going on. But we also know that there's very little other risk in terms of the review. So I think the only risk that's left here is that those inspectors, they will most likely make some observations, issue a 483 letter, and Bristol Myers, and Lonza for Houston, they will have 15 days to respond to that and come up with some kind of root cause analysis and plan how to resolve that in the future, right? And I think the only risk is that they find something that's very severe, a major observation that they would not be able to address in that format and in that time frame, and that would sort of result in a CRL, and that would kill the CVR. I think you have to be realistic that risk exists, but I would put that at maybe 5%. Mm-hmm. So my probability for Ida-cel to get approved went up to 95%.
Yep. Matt, do you have anything you would add there?
I 100% agree with everything he just said. I'm at 95%. My 95% are like, you can't be ever higher than 95%, especially in this situation, because you definitely don't know the unknowns. Yeah, there could be a problem in the plant that we can't even imagine. And of course that could be there. So it'd be impossible to be higher than that. I would like to say that every single stat you look at is higher than 90% if you just look at a generic drug that has the same qualifications as Ida-cel. So a breakthrough designation, 90+% get approved. Major amendments are a positive thing. 90+% major amendment drugs get approved. I believe 12 out of 12 breakthrough designation drugs that got a major amendment all got approved. So 100% of breakthrough designations that got a major amendment got approved. And finally, Ida-cel is a good drug. This is a safe, the best-in-class differentiated product of these three CAR-Ts. There's a reason it should be approved. So it's not, we're not just looking at something in a vacuum with stats. So yes, I'm at 95%, and I'm very excited.
Dan, do you know anything on the stats for when an inspection happens? What percent of complete response letters or rejections happen after an inspection? Does that make sense?
I can answer that. When there's no COVID, there's always inspections. So even a company that they're planning on giving a complete response to, they still inspect. This is important actually, because you could say, well, they're inspecting right now. How does that mean that they haven't gotten rejected for other reasons? But as Dan pointed out, we have a comp in COVID, which is BioMarin in July got a complete response letter for safety and efficacy clinical profile. And the FDA did not send in inspectors as a result. This check, by the way, is we spoke to a former FDA official, and she said that the whole idea of a complete response is even if you know you're going to reject from a clinical profile, and you say, let's say, hey, we need another trial, it's the FDA owes it to the company to inspect, because maybe there's also deficiencies in the manufacturing. So when you give the complete response, you say, oh, and you also have to get the rats out of the kitchen.
So no, that's an important point. And that's actually not what I was driving at. But what you're saying is, hey, the fact that they're inspecting is a bullish sign, because if they were going to turn this drug down in COVID times, they would just reject it.
That's what I was saying. To answer your question, because every drug gets inspected, and we don't know how many get CRL because of manufacturing. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's
such a complex manufacturing, it would be unfair to give you, it's a very low percentage, I think, Dan would probably say, but this is a much more complex manufacturing than a small molecule, some pill or something.
Yeah. Dan, you have anything to add there?
No, I think, most things have been said. I will say, I feel pretty good about the fact that, that the vector manufacturers, Lonza, they've are very reputable for quality nowadays. They had a few issues in the past, a few years ago, in cell therapy, but they specifically then went on this initiative where they put quality above everything else and built those new facilities, have a ton of customers, sort of in the cell therapy and gene therapy space. I also want to add that I think Lonza is one, the Lonza facility is one that could probably be inspected virtually if it's difficult to travel to Houston. Bristol Myers has said that those plants need to be inspected physically, but I could see the FDA compromise there. And I've heard that Lonza had virtual inspections before, not at the site.
That's the point of clarification. Bristol Myers has not said publicly that there has to be physical inspections. They refuse to comment on that exact line. Some of the investor relations people have insinuated it on some private phone calls, but it actually has never been said that they have to physically inspect. They just said the FDA has said they have to inspect plants.
Okay.
So they definitely could do virtual. And Dan and I, not to put words in his mouth, but there's no way they physically went into that brothel. Is it brothel?
Brothel.
Them going into a brothel is a completely different issue here, Matt.
You know what it is? It's the threesome that's on my mind. So I'm thinking about
There you go. There you go.
them going into the brothel facility. I mean, I actually do put 100% chance they'll inspect the Texas facility. It doesn't make any logical sense why they would do one and then say they can't, perspective, do the other.
Agreed. Yeah, and then I'll just say, like, I have some background in healthcare. For me, like, Bristol Myers with the, this is a multi-billion-dollar drug. Like, if in my prior background in healthcare, if you were like, hey, this is safe, this is efficacious, what are the odds that Bristol Myers with this huge drug is going to fail in manufacturing and they're going to give a complete response letter for a drug that could really help a lot of people with cancer? I would have thought the odds were, would round to zero, to be honest with you.
I mean, one more thing to add. You asked historically about any manufacturing CRLs. Well, there's only been 3 CAR-Ts ever filed for approval, and all 3 got approved in the first round. And the last one just got approved in July. Didn't have to get inspected because it's being manufactured at the same plant as the previous CAR-T that's been approved. And Dan said many times in the previous podcast, both of those CAR-Ts had major deficiencies at their plants in the first review cycle. Form 483s. Did I get it right this time?
I mean, I wouldn't call it major deficiencies, but there were 5 factory inspections performed for those two products, and they resulted in 5 483 letters that had, numerous observations. But in all those cases, the companies were able to respond within 15 days, the written response, and that was deemed to be sufficient for the drugs to get
and approved early. It was approved 5-6 weeks early, both of them.
Yeah, a little more than that, I think.
Perfect. Let's see. So I think we've covered, I mean, again, I'll say this is incredible work. This is one of the edgiest checks I've seen and heard of. I'll reiterate, people can judge for themselves if they think you're credible or not. I think you're credible personally. Anything else on Lysoso we should be talking about or thinking about? Because I do want to update Ida-cel real quick as well.
Right. Sure, but actually,
go ahead, please, Dan.
Dan's not credible. He's committing fraud and could go to jail. So I don't know what the upside would be for him to not be credible.
I never want to bring fraud and jail up on this podcast. He's already got his run for the YouTubers. You can see he's already got his "I'm on the run" beard growing. So maybe.
No, but look, I want to comment on that because I appreciate that the pictures that were sent around yesterday were blurry, right, and they didn't have the right date on it. I get it, but at the same time, it's a little interesting, to see that much pushback because it's not that hard, especially after that first podcast, to find me. I had numerous people contact me on LinkedIn, so I have 2 degrees MD and MBA. I run a fund.
Oh, we don't need your bio again, Dan.
No, we don't need to. I'm not going to make my bio, but I'm running a fund. I have a family. I have no interest in going to jail. Like, no interest at all. And I would never post something like that, you know, if it were not 100% truthful. Yeah, it's interesting that still people think it could be some kind of pump. But, you know, I think if you, yeah, I don't really know what to say, but other than that, I'm 100% certain that this is truthful information.
Nothing on this pod's investing advice, but I think you're credible. I just, you know, I think all of us know the big pushback has been, hey, who is this guy? You know, he's not a Wall Street Journal reporter breaking this story.
Yeah.
And people can judge for themselves if they think you're credible or not.
Look, I think I just want to make clear that, you know, I sort of want to share this with the investment community because I think that there are a lot of people, you know, that I know that are in the CVR, that a lot of people are interested, and I think a lot of people are nervous around those inspections. That's why I didn't want to sit on that for any kind of prolonged period of time. I want to, you know, I added a little bit to my position, and then I shared it with other people, and you know, maybe it's people are not used to this kind of diligence, or maybe people are not used to people sharing it publicly. But you know, I sort of wanted to share it with the broader investment community. You know, I do have better pictures. I don't think there's any point in sharing them because I don't think those FDA inspectors would appreciate pictures of pictures of them circulating on social media. And you know, I mean, if you want to see it, I mean, we have pictures of the car driving on the parking lot. I've covered the license plate here. You know, we have non-blurry pictures of the people getting out of the car and walking.
You guys are getting me nervous, man. I don't want any more pictures.
But you know, this doesn't have to be on Twitter. I think I want to say I have tremendous respect for those inspectors, for the FDA. I think it's great the work that they're doing. You know, they haven't missed a single PDUFA. To date, I think, you know, amid this pandemic, doing great work, you know, also evaluating COVID therapeutics in parallel, and you know, nothing but respect, and you know, I don't want anybody to be upset here. I think it's a great outcome from everybody. We all win. Patients win. CVR holders win. Bristol Myers wins. So I'm just happy.
I think, Andrew, it would make a great case study and what happened in the last 24 hours. And usually what happens is when somebody puts out a fake article or a fake press release that they want to acquire a company or whatever it is, it's all anonymous, and the stock pops, and the person, of course, sells it, you know, anonymously into that pop, and you find out it was fraud or fake. The reason why this is so interesting to me is, right, Dan's not anonymous at all, and it's very easy to see that he's a reputable, legitimate investor. And we are still now 24 hours later, and the stock's not where I think it will be once it's actually proven they'd inspect. So that to me is a fascinating situation. Basically, you have two groups of people. You have people that know Dan and trust him, and then you have everybody else. And they're selling stock right now as we speak. And the people that know Dan and trust him are buying it right now at 330. And one is definitively right and one is definitively wrong. It's not even debatable. It's a fact. So we will find out in the next 24, 48 hours. I'm guessing an article will come out by CTFN or something, and we will see the stock go up. It'll go up to 360 probably, or 375. And it'll be proven that there was a discount still as of right now. Maybe this will do it. Maybe your podcast will do it. I'm a little skeptical this podcast will take it to that level. I think it might go up, but not to the actual level when you get a third-party published report that says this is true. So I majored in psychology in college, and to me, this is the psychology behind the last 24 hours is as fascinating as the edge that Dan got. So.
Agreed. Well, look, again, I think this is great work. Nothing here is investing advice, but let's talk next step. So will Bristol put out a PR if there's a successful inspection, or do you guys think we're going to have to wait until, hey, PDUFA approved?
Absolutely won't put out a PR. They won't know there's a successful inspection until they get the report back from the FDA, which won't even be for a week or two at the earliest. And there definitely will be something in that report that probably requires Bristol to respond to. So they have no idea if that response is going to be acceptable. So basically anything that they do to signal that an inspection happened, which in turn the market would interpret as they're going to get approved, could be false to the market. So I think the next step will be one of two things. We either get this article that comes out to confirm what we already know, or we will find out at the 10Q. When the 10Q comes out in earnings in November, they will change the language that inspections have occurred for Ida-cel. There's also a third possibility. They regularly do these private, as I've talked about before, Bristol Myers does these private investor calls or with dial-ups or whatever. And I could see them disclosing on that call that an inspection has occurred or that it's been scheduled. It's kind of hard for them not to do that because they've said so many times every call, no inspection's been scheduled, no inspection's been scheduled, no inspection's been scheduled. And then just to go silent if they have one of those calls would be unlikely, but they also might just not schedule anything for the next few weeks.
The only thing I'd push back on is they're going to be in a quiet date starting basically right now for earnings. So I'd be surprised if they were doing private calls like that.
I agree. Probably won't do anything.
Yeah. Dan, anything else to add on the next steps for Ida-cel?
No, I think, I think we probably get some kind of article in the next few days. I would expect that. CFTN or somebody else.
You've given CFTN all they need to get this article out there. You've given them everything.
Yeah. And like the thing though is that CFTN, they don't take investors as a source. And, I would assume that they would have to verify everything that I have said with their sources. And
to be clear, they only have one source. So if that source refuses to comment, then they can't put an article out.
Yeah, but I do think from a journalist standpoint, it's one thing to call and say, hey, has an inspection happened? And then it's another thing to say, someone saw an FDA inspector in your parking lot. Like, sometimes that kind of juices and opens the doors, I do think.
There was a note yesterday, and Bristol declined to comment on the rumors.
Cool. So I think both of you guys have said 95% chance of Ida-cel getting approved at this point is kind of where you're thinking. Let's talk Ida-cel real quick, because there has been a little bit of information on Ida-cel since the last podcast too. Ida-cel, just for everyone to remember, it needs to get approved by the end of March in order for the CVR to pay off. If it doesn't, it's a 0. And I'll let you guys, how are you guys thinking about Ida-cel? What are the odds of Ida-cel approval at this point?
You want to start off, Sheep? I called you Sheep, Dan.
Sure. So Ida-cel, I think very few people would disagree with the fact that the clinical profile of Ida-cel is extremely favorable and those patients don't have a lot of other options, okay? I think the only questions there are, again, around manufacturing, although the manufacturing process is simpler compared to Ida-cel, and I think the other risk is just timelines that somehow they will get a major amendment. I think overall, the drug is probably 95% likely to get approved during the first review, but I will acknowledge there's some risk of a major amendment or an extension that would push the PDUFA date beyond March 31st. And that's anybody's guess. I think some people might think that there's a substantial probability of that because they got an RTF before. I think it's the opposite. I think the RTF de-risks that, and I think it makes it less likely they will get a major amendment, because a major amendment is what you get when you have to submit additional data to FDA reviewers. And that process where they had the RTF, the FDA basically told them everything that it didn't like about the application, or they told them where all the holes were. They also had an additional meeting with the FDA. They took their time to put together a better application. So I would personally say that the risk of an RTF here is maybe 10%. Sorry, not of an RTF, but of a major amendment is maybe 10%. So I put it at 85% likelihood of approval. Where do I think the CVR will trade? I don't think it will trade there because I think a lot of institutional investors have trouble getting the CVR past their risk committees in size. I think there might also be some selling pressure. Or some people might be forced to reduce their position size if this goes, if Ida-cel gets approved and the CVR trades up. So I would personally see it maybe trade at around $6 once Ida-cel is approved. Matt might be a little more cautious here, but I think at $6, you're basically underwriting a 66% probability of an approval during the first review without a major amendment. And I bet that at 66% people, there will be people that are willing to take that bet. There's a lot of liquidity right now in the markets, a lot of people that are looking for uncorrelated returns. And I can see how so far the CVR might have been too complex because, you know, we had to analyze multiple drugs. We had all this overhang with the inspections, with COVID, Ida-cel and Ida-cel. But once Ida-cel is approved, you will have a precedent. You will have, you know, I think there's some conditional probability at play as well that, you know, if Ida-cel facilities at Juno were good enough for approval, you know, chances are that the Ida-cel facilities in New Jersey will be up to the same standards as well, because, you know, again, it's the same company.
So so if I'm right here, you and Matt both think Ida-cel at this point, 95% odds of approval. Yep. Ida-cel, it sounds like you think, based on everything, about 85% chance of approval.
Correct.
If the CVR pays off, it's a $9 payout. So you think fair value for the CVR today is probably a little bit above $7 is what it sounds like. You're adjusting for, hey, you know, there might be a little bit of illiquidity and just like people don't like to buy CVR risk, but you kind of think if Ida-cel's approved, this is heading towards $6 is kind of where you're thinking, if I'm summarizing correctly.
Correct.
Matt, anything else from you on Ida-cel or kind of fair value?
I agree with everything you said with Ida-cel. I definitely think it will not trade at $6, though I think it should. So, and I have friends that own the CVR that think even I'm optimistic where it trades. So I've long thought it trades in a band. I'll give a band of between 5 and 550, which is pretty precise. So if I'm right, that'll be pretty cool. I don't think it will trade below 475. I actually even made a bet with somebody recently that it will not trade below 475. Oh, I think my bet was for 450. I'm as confident as anything, it will not trade below 450. Happy to take bets. I'll pay 2-to-1 odds to anybody that wants them. I will give you 2-to-1 if it trades.
I'm not. We're done. We're not going into fraud and for processing bets here. But no, I hear you. I hear you.
Anyway, right. I don't want to get Andrew in trouble. You're okay taking royalties from me, but you won't. I'll give you 5% commission on all the bets that
the lawyers are going through the paperwork on the royalties. That's going to be all figured out. I can't be running a bookie website here.
I think 5 to 550. But to be clear, I will be extremely overweight this at 5 to 550 going into Ida-cel. I think 85% is probably conservative. I just threw out some odds to you before. 90% of breakthrough designation drugs get approved in the first cycle. This is not only a breakthrough designation drug, but a first-to-market unmet need where you can call 100 oncologists and all of them will tell you that this is an approvable drug with a really good clinical profile. So your risk is in the manufacturing side. And I say 10%. You know, you have a 10% risk there. But, you know, 85, 90, whatever. I think the risk of major amendment is low, very low, because they had an RTF and they were given a list of everything that was missing in this application and they resubmitted it. So unless they somehow can thin this very thin line, or thread a very thin needle where they put in just enough information to get the RTF, the application through the next, to be accepted, but not enough to where the FDA is going to say, hey, we're going to deem you a major amendment. I just don't know how that's possible. Yes, they can get a major amendment for something else that was not part of the RTF. But again, the letter they get when they get an RTF goes through the entire application and says what's deficient and what's not. So they had kind of like a free look. It's not a free look. It cost us 3 months. But you know what I'm saying. So I think major amendment risk is 5% or less. Only 10% of drugs get major amendments. And that's without RTFs. So if you just look at that perspective, there's a 10% chance there. I also think there'd be a huge lawsuit if it goes from an RTF to a major amendment, and you would have contingent value from a liability perspective from Bristol Myers.
Well, look, Matt, I gotta thank you. You brought up gambling, you brought up fraud, and you brought up lawsuits on this podcast. So you really hit for the trifecta there.
I'm trying to bring down my competition.
I'm just gonna disclose one more time. CVRs are risky. Nothing here is investing advice. All of us have positions in these securities. Dan, Matt, anything else you guys want to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the only thing I want to add is we've been through this RTF argument before with ozanimod. It was actually the first milestone in this CVR, right? And I think a lot of people perceive that as being very risky as well. the history there was ozanimab before under Celgene got an RTF because they did not characterize a major metabolite of the drug. And the FDA basically told them what they have to do, and agreed that bridging studies in that case would be enough to refile. They did all of the studies, refiled, and had no trouble getting this approved. And I was making the same argument back then, that the fact that you get an RTF and feedback from the FDA that they tell you specifically what kind of studies you need to run, what kind of additional information you need to submit. It's almost like if you want to compare it, if you have some kind of test in college and the professor gives you feedback and lets you retake the test, chances are that you're going to pass the second time.
Yep. Perfect. Well, hey guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Dan, Matt, your work here has been great. I know a lot of people in Value Investors Club are going to owe you a couple beers after this, but Dan, I mean, again, I think this is one of the most creative and coolest checks I've ever gotten. I think both of you have done great work on this. I think both of you, some people on Twitter might owe you guys some Patron money or something if this all pays out. But hey, this is great. Thank you guys for coming on. On the last podcast, I wrapped it up by saying, I hope we're talking in December and this is a $6 CVR, and I stand by that. I feel like it's more likely today, and maybe next month we'll do an update and we'll only be talking about Ida-cel. So thanks again, guys, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you.